So thank you for having me. I consider myself part of the Growth Africa family. In 2016, we did our Angel Fair and we did the boot camp here. I've known Johnny and Ian for a very long time, and it's really great to see them move from the old building in near Yaya Center to this great space. So, and as I told you, I do work from here from sometimes when I'm here. So I really like what Growth Africa is doing. The fact that it's also growing across Africa. So by way of background, I'm from Ghana and I'm an entrepreneur, basically schooled in Ghana. And then after school, fell in love with a computer. I first saw a computer in high school. I didn't have one at home. My dad wanted me to be a mechanical engineer, which he still thinks I should go to school and become a mechanical engineer, by the way. And when I first met a computer, it's just this feeling. And I just felt this is what I'm going to do the rest of my life. So in high school, anytime I had a free time, I was at a computer lab. Like everybody will go home. I was the old guy who was always opening the place. I'll go to school early just because I want to get access to the computer, and I'll be the last person leaving and closing up the place. So that experience it really opened me up to the world, and I felt that this is what I want to do. And we had internet there, so that's how I could get on the web. And I remember back then in Ghana, getting on the internet the internet was rationalized. So during the day, it's more expensive. So the best time to get on the internet is after hours. So I would stay, Sunday I would go home, come back to the computer lab, and then sit there and be doing research and reading about the internet. So fast forward, I finished school and I started working for a company my first company I worked for was Ghana Classifieds, which was a web company. And that was actually I worked for that company because a friend of mine was working there and basically say, hey, why don't you come and join us doing some of the, so I used to go there on holidays and stuff like that. So did that, and that basically opened me up into the ISP world. And I focus on network engineering, so I'm not a software guy. The reason was that I really wanted to I was fascinated by how computers talk to each other. And so I then went and worked for NCS and Africa Online, which was started by a Kenyan guy, Istima Katiani. But very quickly, my entrepreneurial instinct started kicking in. And I really wanted to start doing my own thing. And then I remember luckily, the UNECA had a program at that time called the African Information Society Initiative. And I got this consulting gig, and basically we were supposed to set up internet cafes. Back then, internet cafes was a place to go get connectivity. And we're going to do this across different countries. So that's how I got into Africa. So a young Ghanaian guy got into UN consulting gig. So I was in Ethiopia, I came to Kenya, I went to Uganda, Tanzania. Anyway, so long story short, between 98 and 2008, I was involved in setting up this internet cafes, then a phenomenon shifted to ISPs. But it was quite interesting because while setting up these internet cafes, the internet cafes the service provided to them were the ISPs. So I kind of had this interconnection between these internet cafes and the ISPs. In certain markets, we actually help set up ISPs. So for example, in Kenya, I was involved in setting up something called ISP Kenya. My business partner, Brian Longway, he has started it in Westlands. And basically, they were creating an enterprise internet platform to connect enterprises to the internet. So anyway, fast forward between 2008 and 1998 and 2008, I helped build about 32 of these companies across 14 across 32 countries. And for me, that was a very important foundation. I got to understand Africa deeply because, set up a business in the place, to hang out with people. It's not just flying in and just flying out. I came to Kenya like 5 times. And through that process, we did certain things that were very significant. One was we helped certain countries break their internet gateway monopoly. So for example, in Kenya, there was JumboNet, which was Telecom Kenya. So we fought to actually remove the monopoly of JumboNet through an association we created called TESPOC. And in TESPOC, when I had to set up the Kenyan Internet Exchange Point, which is still somewhere downtown. Last time I was downtown, went to the building, they had this huge space there. With a lot of machines, but we started with the small switch. I remember very well going to that building for the first time. So So we did that, and then the second thing when we started getting the ISPs to band together, so we set up this ISP association. So helped found the African ISP Association, and we went into the third phase. So now we started getting the ISPs to interconnect through what we call internet action points, because most of the ISPs were interconnecting outside of the country. So we started building what we call the fabric of the local internet infrastructure. Then, like I said, we set up the African ISP Association, which is a trade association for all the ISPs. The most significant thing that we did out of that was we managed to convince the African Union to see the internet exchange point as a core national infrastructure. So today, the African Union has a program called the African Internet Exchange System, AXIS, that has been helping create internet infrastructure across different African countries. And in certain countries, the legislation. And so from that era, that was one of the most significant things we did. And then in 2006, something happened. Basically, the second bottleneck that we realized was that even though the local internet fabric was created, everybody's going out internationally was still going through one submarine cable. So West Africa had this submarine cable called SAT3, which was basically running off the Western Seaboard, gets to South Africa, doesn't come to East Africa, then goes to Mauritius and goes to India. So East Africa actually was the only part of the world that didn't have a submarine cable. So at that time, internet was very expensive in Kenya and very slow because you're going through satellite. So, that was kind of like a third big problem. And at that time, I had been doing this ISP stuff. We built internet exchange points, but we realized that even though it's almost like we carried this competitive retail downstream, industry, but then it's almost like a pyramid. We all have to go through, one submarine cable, right? And it was owned by the incumbents. So what happened was this time, so you guys are playing here, but when you get here, you have to fight with this. So we came up with this David and Goliath. So they were the Goliaths and we were the Davids. So I really wanted to do something about it. And at that time, there was a program in Stanford University called the Routers Foundation was funding this program called the Digital Vision Program. And basically the idea was that you go to Stanford, which is prestigious. But most important thing, the program wants you to come with a big problem, and beyond, doing the classes and taking classes, and you do research, and you also come up with a solution. So I wrote this concept note about how to help build more submarine cables in Africa, which everybody thought was not going to happen. How are you going to be able to build these incumbent telcos, the big guys at that time? At that time, the mobile operators weren't big. So MT and all these guys, they were also in their formation stages. But I really thought that, it was worth trying the effort. So anyway, I went to Stanford, and did quite some amazing work, did some research, came up with what is open access model. So I looked at open access models in academic publishing and told myself we can actually apply the same principles to the telecom world. And then coincidentally, the World Bank was doing this program through InfoDev, where they were also researching the same thing. Actually, the World Bank was about to finance a cable called EASY for East Africa. And they were going to do it the same way that SAT3 was built. So in my first concept note, I actually cited that cable and said that the World Bank was going to make the same mistake twice. And somehow it went somewhere in the World Bank, someone picked it up. So I got an email from someone who said, okay, do you have an alternative way of doing this? And I said, well, that's what I'm studying now. And they said, well, we're trying to put together a research team to do that. Would you like to be part of it? Anyway, long story short, we did that exercise. Then the Kenyan government at that time, Bitanga and Demo was the peers at the Ministry of Communications. And I actually read this paper that we wrote, and out of the blue wrote me an email and said, Eric, we're trying to build a submarine cable and we want to use open access models. Would you like to be part of it? I said, why not? For me, it was just great because I'd done this theoretical work. And for me, it was kind of like the second phase of my career. So I'm going to now do the practical part of it. So this was 2007. So I came here, and I ended up. This was the longest time I stayed in Kenya. I stayed here for almost 6 months. This was before the elections, and we did a whole exercise during the election violence and when the country was burning up. We were busy connected into 2018. Anyway, we did the stuff, and then as history will have it, the elections came, the violence and everything. But we had managed to go through it and connected with the TISALA, done all the groundwork, and then sort of a year later the cable landed. And literally, when we did the Teams cable, not only did they connect Kenya, but they also connected, it also became a motivation for other cables to be built. So CECOM was done, Easy was done, and literally Kenya moved from not having any cable to having 3. within like 2 years. And basically the cost of connectivity just went like, which I think is quite fascinating in a sense that, I mean, what we're doing today was non-existent. You know, I was just telling you earlier, Eric Hessman, connectivity was so expensive. It was just like, getting connectivity, you have to pay a lot, and there was nowhere to hang out. When we were doing the Teams cable, Eric Hessman, Ori, Okolo, and Juliana, they decided to set up iHub. Actually, I remember there was Eric, you should be part. I said, no, I want to do the connectivity part. Like, this is what I love to do. Why don't I do this thing with these guys? You guys figure it out, and we will meet at some point. Anyway, long story short, the Teams cable, when it landed, the first place that they got huge connectivity was iHub. I remember Bitangi then said we should take 20 gig capacity to iHub, which was really, I thought was one of the most strategic decisions, because suddenly iHub had this high speed connectivity. And as you know, a lot of innovation came out of there, and then a lot of hubs were built. Anyway, sorry about the long introduction, but that's the background. That's how I got into building submarine cables, and and then a lot of cables were built. So fast forward, 2012. So what I was doing is I've been advising startups, and one of the startups was started in Ghana called SMSGH. Now we call the company Haptel. And it was two Ghanaians that I knew out of college, and the company had become very successful, and they wanted to expand into Africa. So in 2012, I was on the board, and the board said, would you like to take an executive role and lead this expansion? And I told them, okay, well, I don't know what, we'd done this cable stuff. So I did actually help build another cable called Main One in West Africa. So after we did Teams, I went back, we did Main One, we did I was involved with 2 terrestrial fiber, one for Ghana called NCBC, and the other one was Suburban Telecom in Nigeria. And so in 2012, I kind of figured, what do I want to do next? And this company, and I had about 4 startups that I was advising, some of that I put in a little bit of money. And SMSGH, now called Haptel, wanted to expand into Africa. So the guys was like, would you like to do this? And I was like, well, maybe I should do it. And I said, well, I like to do it, but I also want to do some more investments. So if you guys will let me do my investments, then I can be an employee and still do my studies. So yeah, sure, you can do it so long as you don't invest in companies that will compete with us. So anyway, so it was a nice arrangement. And so I helped sort of craft the whole Africa strategy. Now the new company called Haptel is involved in that whole rebranding. We restructured the whole business because the guy started the company as a Ghanaian company, right? So 2013 we set off, and basically within 2 years we went into 3 countries. We went to Nigeria, Kenya, and Cameroon. And I led that whole exercise. And during that time, I did a lot of angel investments. So that's when I kind of grew my angel investing career. Then come 2015, I started organizing things, so set up a proper structure, hired a team for the company. So I left the role as an executive director, went back to the board, and essentially decided to now focus purely as an investor. So to kind of run a long introduction short, I actually didn't plan to be an investor. I somehow stumbled into it. And as I've told you, you can see that my life is just stumble into things. There are a lot of things I didn't plan. But somehow I think I'm gifted to know what's going to happen next, and somehow I follow my nose and then it works out. So so fast forward, we are Chanzo Capital, there are 3 partners. We have 12 startups that we've invested in, 3 in Kenya, 2 in South Africa, 1 in Nigeria, 1 in Benin, 2 in Nigeria. I think the others are in Ghana. Most of our investments are in Ghana. And basically we really want to set up a different kind of a firm. We want to help entrepreneurs become profitable, to build real African businesses. And we work with a lot of people on the ground, like Growth Hub. We believe that incubators, accelerators are a critical part of the ecosystem. So that's what I do now. And this is one of my yearly visits, one of 3 or 4 visits every year where I come to Kenya and hang out. But also a lot of people were part of this. By the way, it wasn't just me. I think Bitanga and them was, I always say this when I interview, I think that guy doesn't get the credit he deserves. He was a very visionary guy. I can't believe that he convinced me to stay here, and actually didn't go to Ghana for Christmas. It was the first time I spent Christmas without my family. And somehow he said, you got to stay. We have to do it now. If we don't do it, it won't happen. It's true. I mean, if we didn't do the Teams cable, and we've seen election violence and everything, the country was going to a war after wars. So would have had a different situation. So I have a lot of respect for that guy. I think that as a Kenyan, he was very patriotic and he was just incredible. He convinced me. I wouldn't have done it by myself. But somebody. So anyway, there are people like him. The current CS, Joe Mushero, actually was my first business partner. I know Joe very well, and a lot of people have really contributed. So it's a team effort. Now it's more than 15 years. So I look at that phrase that people still use, but but we can say 50 years are very critical, where a lot of things happen as is explained, but yes. So I believe that incubators, accelerators, innovation hubs, whatever name you use for it, are very, very critical. As you know, one of the most successful innovations out of Kenya is Ushahidi. Which came out of iHub. Actually, Ushahidi was there before iHub. Somehow, the guys needed a space to work. That's how actually they created iHub. And they have started Ushahidi, David, Dowdy Weir, Eric Hestman, Juliana, and all that, those guys. And I think that what was important with what they did was that they actually started building the company and then realized that we needed to build an ecosystem. And part of building an ecosystem is people, but also you need a physical space that people come to, right? And I think that sort of paradigm shift was quite, at that time, it didn't look important, but today I think it's the most important, And I believe that incubators and accelerators, whilst they are very hard to sustain, even in the world, actually, when you take even Silicon Valley, there are very few incubators and accelerators are successful, maybe Y Combinator and a few, 3 or 4 globally. So it's something that is necessary, but it's hard to sustain. And that's where public money is important in this game. So you need public money that underwrites things like that, because a lot of companies are going to get started. A lot of them will fail within that process, but that process is important. So you have a machinery that somebody has an idea, it has somewhere that he can go to, and then he has a space to actually try and manifest that idea, right? And if you don't have that space, then a lot of people will have ideas, but they don't have any chance of materializing it, right? So for me, it's almost like that's the first gear when you want to move the car of innovation, right? You have to put gear 1, and gear 1 is having that space that people can go to, and they can meet other like-minded people. They can meet people that can help them with the things they need to be able to get from that idea to something that is sort of tangible, right? And if you don't have that, then you just have, you basically, it's almost like step 1 is not there, like the first gear is not there, right? Yes, some people, someone can jumpstart a car with gear 2, but ideally you should go to gear 1, right? So to that extent, I really believe that incubators and accelerators are very critical. But they are very tough to sustain. And I think that, and I know, the recent debates about, a lot of these incubators, are they sustainable and all that stuff. I don't buy a lot of that debate. I think, first of all, one of my main things is that the building, an ecosystem, and what we're doing is just a decade, right? So we just have Silicon Valley was built by 50 years. So we are nowhere near, we should be sort of, we still have a long way to go. So that's one. And I'm not saying that to say that we should rest on our laurels. I'm just saying that this thing takes time, and we are just 1 decade into it, right? So it's going to take us time to figure a lot of things out. And some of this stuff is just that a lot of things will fail, and a lot of incubators and accelerators will die, and new ones will come, and eventually something will work out, right? So I want to put that doesn't buy the critique. And also the argument that, a lot of these incubators are not sustainable, it's grant money. I think there's room for public funding in this game. The most important thing is that the incubators and accelerators need to start thinking towards how do we become sustainable. And I think that the sustainability models for incubators and accelerators may be different here compared to the US, or maybe different from here and Asia, right? Because what is important is that you have to understand the context within which you operate. And you cannot build a business, or you cannot build an ecosystem outside the cultural context of how people understand the way things work. And so I'm also a firm believer, as I mentioned, that we believe that the venture firm that we're trying to build, the way we're going to do venture investing in Africa is going to be different from how it's done in Silicon Valley. For me, it's just from the context, because Africa is very different, right? And so you cannot start comparing us with another firm that was 5 years in Silicon Valley, right? Because that firm is benefiting from 50 years of Silicon Valley being constructed. And we are not there yet.
Yeah,
But yeah, I
you,
mean, different ecosystems, you have to be like a chameleon. Like I won't go to South Africa and then be expecting to have nyama choma. Like, you won't have it there. You have to go to South Africa to eat pap. They go like this when I went to watch a cricket game because one of my friends likes cricket. I'm not a big cricket fan, but I want to hang out with my friends, so I'll go watch cricket. And maybe I'll get to like it, but I like soccer. Ghana with soccer is what we play. I used to play. But so you have to, yeah, if you're going to succeed. The first is context, right? So one of the important things about Africa is that Africa is 1 billion people, but Africa is very heterogeneous. And when you take the US, or even Europe is not as heterogeneous as the US. However, the US is the most homogeneous market that you find. So it's, states, the same country. You can pretty much do something in New York and take it to San Francisco. And even then, the way guys invest in San Francisco and New York is very different. I have investor friends in New York who wouldn't even take certain valuations from guys in San Francisco. And this is the same country, just two coasts, right? East Coast and West Coast. So the first thing is that there is no linear market. So first of all, you need to understand that Africa is very heterogeneous. So even though Ghana and Kenya may be similar, the way business is done in the two countries is very different, right? So that's one. And the second is, so that means that if you have a business that works in Kenya, you just cannot copy it from Kenya and paste it the same way in Ghana. So the first is that you, the entrepreneur, need to understand that you have to make certain shifts. And I think there are 4 areas that you have to do shifts. So the first is in the technology itself and the way they operate. So for example, we tell a lot of entrepreneurs that you need to make your platform, your app, or whatever it is, scalable. And I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, you may say, I want to build a business for Africa or for the world, but your reality is Kenya. So you will almost most likely, for example, you may denominate the app in Kenyan shillings, right? You can't take it just to Ghana. So one of the further, you have to change the denomination, right? And that's fine. It's almost like you have to dream big, but you have to start in Kenya, right? But it's important for you to understand that as you go out of Kenya, you have the other factors that come to play. So one is so you will say you have to make the technology scalable. The second is the team, right? So whilst it's great for you, you have built a great team in Kenya. A lot of people say, oh, let me take those people and then take them to Ghana. So those guys are great in Kenya. They know how to make the business work in Kenya. But when you put them in Ghana, they may start behaving like the business is in Kenya, but it's not in Kenya, it's in Ghana now. So one of the things we believe is that you need to have a combination of guys from Ghana who understand the local context of how things work in Ghana. And they have to now start rubbing brains with the guys from Kenya who say this is how we do it in Kenya. And there needs to be a balance. You need to finding the balance between those two is very critical. So that the Kenyan guys can say, okay, in Kenya, this is how it works. And the Ghana guys say, well, in Ghana, it works like this. And those two must be able to come to understand that, okay, so actually, we need to do it like this to there, in Ghana. Right? So finding the right team is very, very critical to being successful in scaling your business. And it's a combination of what we call local and international talent, and there needs to be a balance. The third is the business model itself. So for example, Kenya is very heavily mobile money driven fintech space. So here, I mean, when I come to Kenya, I don't see Kenyan shillings anymore. Like when I got in, the night I got in, I had 100 shillings for my previous trip. And then I gave it as a tip to my Uber driver, and I haven't touched money still. Like literally. And I will leave here and I won't touch money because I have mobile money on my phone and I have my card and I can use it everywhere. Ghana is not like that. Ghana, mobile money is still picking up. You still have to pay people cash. People still like carrying money. Here, really by the roadside selling, we'll take mobile money, right? So if you then take a business and think like, oh, we're just going to do mobile money in Ghana, it will not work. You have to say, we'll take some cash. So you have to vary. So the business model may vary a little bit in Ghana. If you go to Nigeria, it's different, right? So the business model, you need to be able to figure out how do you vary the business model to suit the market. Sometimes it may work the same way it works in the previous market, but in most cases, you have to sort of vary it a little bit. And then the third is how you acquire customers, which is the critical part, right? So a perfect example is in Nigeria. Most Nigerians gravitate towards businesses that are owned by Nigerians. Like literally, Nigerians will fight you back if you own your business 100%. You just feel like you're not one of them. It's a very strong Nigerian thing. So in Nigeria, it's important for you to have a local partner and make that person the front of the business. In Ghana, it's not really a big deal. In Kenya, it's not a big deal, right? But in Nigeria, it's a big deal. So you have to understand that construct. And if you don't understand that construct, you may have a great business, but just the way you acquire customers in Nigeria is going to be slightly different from the way you acquire customers here. For example, in South Africa is very much, people do a lot of things virtually. So you can literally hire an online virtual marketing team that will basically promote your business and get customers for you. In Nigeria, anybody who do business or Ghana, they want to see you. Who are you? They want to shake your hand. They want to say, let's go have a drink, right? So the way you acquire customers is very different from different markets. And you have to understand these dynamics, right? So those are sort of the critical things that make the different markets differ from each other. And there are other factors, but these are the critical things for business: customer acquisition, building a team, business model, and figuring out technology. Okay, so generally there are 3 criteria that every investor uses to assess a business at an early stage. So I'm talking about angel stage. So normally you have to have a product, and generally the product comes from the idea. There are certain investors that invest in ideas, right? So they want to spend time with an entrepreneur and understand the idea and help them get it to a product. So sometimes ideas are important. I think generally ideas are important, but ideas are important. They are more important when you can execute, right? And there's certain investors that will help you get from idea to first product, minimum viable product, and I've done that before. And so in that stead, what happens is that the product is important, but the entrepreneur is more important, the person that executes, right? Then, so there's product. Then the next thing is the market. So is there a market for this product? And then there's something that sits between the two of them is the entrepreneur or the team. So it's almost like the team it's almost like a pivot, and the team is the balancing act. So in the early stage, we say something that people invest in people, right? So really, the investor is investing in you, the entrepreneur, or the team that is starting. But for him he or she to do that, he or she must know that the team can build the product and there's a market for the product. Right? So these are the 3 critical things. But we place a lot of emphasis on the team because the other differentiating factor about Africa is that Africa is a relationship-based society. So US is a very linear society, right? So in America, people are very individualistic. In Africa, people are very family-oriented, right? So one of the things that we look out for is whether this entrepreneur can build a team around themselves, right? And even if they cannot do everything, and most entrepreneurs cannot do everything, they're very good at doing one thing, right? Or maybe max 2 or 3. But the important thing is that can this person assemble a team around them to execute on the idea? So that's very important. Then there's a 4th factor that has come to play, which we sort of pay attention to a lot, which is timing, right? So that called David Ross did this famous TED Talk where they looked at the US market and said, what has been responsible for the success of most recent technology innovations? And it turned out that timing was the most important factor. So Facebook is not a new idea. Uber is not a new idea. Airbnb is not a new idea. The reason these companies have become so successful is because they got the timing right. I mean, there was something called MySpace, Hi-Fi, where all the social networks came before. There was Friendly and all these guys didn't succeed. So there's a factor that it's not only enough to have a great team and be able to get a market right, but the team must be able to get the timing right. So it's almost like another 3rd factor, right? There's 3 factors that sit on it. And then there's a 4th factor that I have added, which I call tenacity. Right. So there's kind of 5 factor. The 4th factor that we have added is timing, because we believe that in Africa, because we are in an early stage, the market is generally not matured. Right. So you may have a great idea, but you need to be able to have enough staying power for the market to get there. Right. And so it's not just your business may just fail not because you're not a great entrepreneur. Not because you didn't get a good product market fit, not because you didn't build a good team, but just because you couldn't stick around long enough for the market to come around. So I would say those are like the 5 things that I pay attention to. And like I said, the most critical thing among the 5 is the team, the entrepreneur still. But I need to be able to figure out somehow that the entrepreneur has a fair balance between the other 4, right? And the most important thing is that the entrepreneur may not have everything in themselves, but you want to look at for, can this person find other people that will bring the other elements? And sometimes this is hard to figure out because, human being, we are all limited in what we can do, right? Everybody's, a few people are multi-talented, but most people can do very specific things. And so sometimes it's hard to then figure out that an entrepreneur who is very good at sales can be able to build a technical team, right? He may be able to figure out the right people to hire. If he doesn't have, for example, a CTO co-founder, right? And then you want to figure out whether the CTO co-founder, if they are working together, will know when to defer to the other guy who is the CEO guy. So these dynamics are very, very critical. And it just takes time. And my view is that, and that's why I spend a lot of time on the ground. People say, Eric, why are you always in different countries? Because by spending time with people, you get to know them. I mean, there are things that you can get to know people by phone and yes, email and all this stuff. But spending time with the entrepreneur is very important because you get to know them. They also get to know you better. I mean, one of the things that we feel as investors, well, and I put myself in the investment category, is that you always think it's not a one-way street. It's not that entrepreneurs must understand investors because they are giving you money, but you, the investor, must also understand entrepreneurs, right? So I really believe that it's a two-way street, and we both have to get to know each other. We get to spend time with the entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs need to spend time with investors. Investors need to understand entrepreneurs the same way investors want entrepreneurs to understand them, right? And I actually believe that in the real sense of it, the entrepreneurs have leverage. The reason is that, you see, at the end of the day, you may have money, but if the entrepreneur doesn't have the new idea that is going to make change and make impact and bring return, yeah, you can put your money in the bank and everybody can do that and pretty much there's no leverage, right? So I believe that really the entrepreneurs have the leverage. But in a situation where you have a scarcity of capital, it almost looks like the investors have the leverage, but it's not. Actually, if you go to Silicon Valley, entrepreneurs have the leverage. The people just have money and they want to invest, and then they can find great ideas. Actually, one of the things that Silicon Valley is, the backlash that Silicon Valley got recently is that, I mean, they're investing in like Twitter, man. What's Twitter? I mean, Elon Musk is probably the most impressive guy who's come out in the last decade after Apple, right? That's really built something that is world-changing. And this is in Silicon Valley where the smartest people go to the smartest schools out there, the smartest people, right? So anyway, yeah. So if you take the temperature of innovation across the world, it's almost like it's a wave that is moving, right? So it started in the US, then it moved to Europe, then it was last spotted in Asia. So Asia became the big technology hub of the 19th century. I mean, can you imagine like a company like Didi didn't exist just like 20 years ago? And basically Didi has become so big that they bought Uber in China, all right? So it's almost like, in my view, Africa is the next destination for the wave. And that's what I mean by Asia's time is over. And Africa is going to be the new destination for great ideas. And there are two main phenomena basis for that. The first is, so as I said, it's like a wave that's moving. And if you look at it, it's because Africa has become a spotlight because of the necessity in Africa, right? And as we know, necessity is the mother of invention, right? In the 90s, Asia became that continent, but it was like Asia was the most poorest place and et cetera. And then, Asia's sort of come with their own solution. The second is that Africa probably has the most resource, so human resource. So as you know, Africa is currently a billion people, a little bit over a billion. It's extrapolated that in the next 2 decades, Africa is going to constitute 40% of the world's population. And 70% of that is youthful, right? And the youth have taken to technology. Right? So that's the second important factor, that you have a phenomenon that is just driven by a paradigm shift that I cannot explain. Because like when I was in school, the in thing was that you finish school, you either get a job or leave the continent, right? And then one generation after me, I mean, these guys said we can build the next Google out of Africa. I mean, when you hear some of the entrepreneurs speak, you just be like, are you in Africa? Like, this is the most difficult place, right? And people can believe in themselves and they can believe they can build something out of there. So first is, the phenomenon of connectivity, I believe, is made online a lifestyle. So today everybody has a phone, everybody's online, people on Instagram. So online is a lifestyle, right? And if you look at how it happened in Asia, it was the same thing. People started getting online, and the next thing is online business. right? So businesses started going online. So I believe that that's what I call digitizing the economy, right? So a lot of economic, so education, health, agriculture, the usual stuff that constitutes an economic activity becomes digitized, right? Then I asked myself the question, which countries are leading this process? That's how I came up with the Keynes countries, which is Kenya, Ivory Coast, Nigeria, Ghana, and South Africa. And the idea was to say these guys are leading, so you need to look at them. And actually we came up with 5 criteria that put these countries up there. So the first is connectivity, that they have a very broadband, etc. The second is they have a very a robust telecom competitive space. So if you look at it, there's more than 3 telecom operators, etc., etc. And then the fourth was the tech infrastructure, that there was a very strong tech infrastructure. The fourth was the enabling environment, that there was an innovation, a pro-innovation agenda by government and policymakers, etc. And then the third was this important phenomenon that the youth were becoming entrepreneurial, right? That they just wanted to take to building their own stuff and manifesting their own destiny. And so the point was to say that these are the leading lights, and then all the other countries can look to follow them. And the question then becomes that how do other countries get to that? And I think that the first point is to try and fit the criteria. So if you don't have broadband, then you should be thinking, how do we have a competitive telecom space, right? How do we drive innovation, and how do we create an enabling policy environment? How do we get a youth to get better education so they can sort of begin to be entrepreneurial or have a space that they can express themselves entrepreneurially? But I think that in all, the idea is to sort of postulate how Africa's digital future is going to be. And the point here is that it's not going to be homogeneous. It's going to, again, be heterogeneous. And there are going to be countries that are going to be ahead, and there are going to be countries that are going to follow. And hopefully the ecosystems that we see are going to be also different. So there are countries that are kind of leading in the ecosystem development. So if you take the 5 Kings countries, the reason they are ahead also is actually, if you take the entrepreneurial part, one of the subsets of that is ecosystem. That the entrepreneurs are operating as an ecosystem, so the entrepreneurs know each other, share ideas. And these are not guys, they are not learning from business school. They didn't do this before. Some of them are learning from each other. They work within these spaces. And so these spaces are very important for them to be able to manifest themselves.